Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Get hyped for another episode of Rock and Read. This week we're going to read Chapter 3 from the always fascinating book, the great book of rock trivia. Chapter 3 is called The Bands. Let's see what kind of life-changing facts Chapter 3 has in store for us. Here we go. The legendary bands are what made rock and roll what it is today. Where would rock be without the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and the Beach Boys? With more musicians comes more drama, and many great bands broke up because of infighting, but they still left their mark on rock music. Learn more about these larger-than-life rock groups. The Beach Boys. The California Surfer Boys themselves, right? Not exactly. The California part is true, but only one member, Dennis Wilson, was a surfer. They named themselves the Pendletones, but the record label changed the name to the Beach Boys without consulting the young band. Brian Wilson briefly led another band on the side called Kenny and the Cadets. The Wilson brothers' mom, Audrey, was one of their singers. I Get Around features modulation, key change, a technique common in classical music but uncommon in pop and rock. Pet Sounds was one of the most innovative records in rock music history. In the songs on that record, you can hear accordions, harpsichord, vibraphone, sleigh and bicycle bells, dogs barking, silverware, and plastic water jugs, along with the usual instruments. But did you know that one of the lyricists also wrote jingles for brands such as Mattel, Gallo Wines, and Max Factor? Remember the goats on the cover of Pet Sounds? Evidently, the Beach Boys weren't fond of them. The goats pushed, jumped on, and bit the band members, and according to bassist Bruce Johnston, ate a radio. And if you think the title track sounds like a James Bond theme, well, that was the intention. The Beatles. There is little that is not known about the Fab Four, or Five, but perhaps you didn't know that they once bought 5 Greek islands with the intention of starting a utopian community. The whim didn't last long. Even rock stars mishear song lyrics. Bob Dylan thought the line, "I can't hide" and "I want to hold your hand" was "I get high." And if, like most of us, you dislike your own voice, you can take comfort in the fact that the great John Lennon felt the same way about his voice. George Harrison loved a British candy called Jelly Babies. Unfortunately, fans took it a bit too far and started chucking them at him during concerts. American fans threw jelly beans, which are harder than jelly babies, and thus painful when they hit. You probably know that Ringo was the shortest Beatle. He was 5'8", while the other 3 were 5'11". I Am the Walrus was banned by the BBC for the word knickers. Others were banned for real or alleged drug references. There is a street called Penny Lane in Liverpool. After the song was released, people started stealing the signs so often that the city stopped putting them up. They now paint the street names on the buildings. The Beatles had a number of successful movies, but they didn't make all the ones they wanted. The Fab Four wanted to do Lord of the Rings with Stanley Kubrick. Both Tolkien and Kubrick opposed the idea, so it never panned out. They even knew which parts they wanted to play. George would have been Gandalf because, of course, he would. Who else? A less obvious casting call was John as Gollum, but that's the role he wanted. Paul wanted to be Frodo, and Ringo wanted to be Sam. That's not hard to visualize, actually. The Jungle Book director, Wolfgang Reitherman, really wanted the Beatles to do the voice acting for the Vultures, but John decided that wasn't a good fit. The Rolling Stones. The bad boys of rock may have been the first to use the word groupie. Their history goes back further than the band. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger have known each other since they were 5 years old. Both were already interested in music. Mick Jagger's distinctive voice is partially due to the fact that he accidentally bit off part of his tongue as a child. Even with Jagger's famous mouth, the Stones claim that their tongue logo comes from the Hindu goddess Kali. Satisfaction was almost a very different song. Hard to imagine, but it was originally played on a harmonica. The Stones also had to sing "Let's Spend Some Time Together" instead of "Let's Spend the Night Together" to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. Some people like their songs just the way they are, though, such as Martin Scorsese. His song of choice is "Gimme Shelter," and he has used it in 4 movies. The Rolling Stones like to play snooker, and they always have a table for it when touring. Keith Richards loves shepherd's pie, and he has to have it while on tour, and he has to be the one to break the crust. People have been fired for digging in before him. The rest of the band members like pie, too. They started a custard pie fight in a room full of journalists at the launch of their Beggar's Banquet. The Monkees. The Monkees were created for TV, and their music was tightly controlled by their managers at the beginning, so the Prefab Four had very little input as to what they performed. The show's casting call invited 4 insane boys to try out, and further specified spirited Ben Frank types. The latter requirement referred to the type of guys who hung out at a coffee shop on Sunset Strip. The show was supposed to depict a band that was an unsuccessful Beatles imitation, but the group ended up becoming one of the best bands of the 60s. By the way, did you know that the full version of Peter Tork's surname is Thorkelson? Also, talent often runs in families. Mike Nesmith's mom, Betsy Nesmith Graham, invented liquid paper in 1956. Botched your last job interview? Don't worry, Mike Nesmith showed up to the audition holding his laundry bag, and he still got the job. They got along well with the Beatles, and John Lennon called them the Marx Brothers of rock. The Monkees had their own imitators. Star Trek's Pavel Chekhov was based on Davy Jones, and it was a ploy to get more teens, especially girls, to watch the series. The Who. Guitarist Pete Townshend was the storyteller of the group. He was the one who came up with the stories that became the double albums and rock operas Tommy and Quadrophenia. He's known for his stage technique of swinging his arm around like a windmill while strumming his guitar. This move most likely inspired rock fans to play air guitar. He later admitted he had copied the move after seeing Keith Richards do it once. Richards himself seemed to think the technique was silly and not worth repeating. If Townshend was the storyteller, then drummer Keith Moon was the troublemaker. His birthday party ended with a car in the hotel swimming pool, resulting in the band being barred from Holiday Inn. Yes, all Holiday Inns. Due to his substance abuse issues, he once passed out during a concert. An amateur drummer from the audience took his place for the concert, and it went surprisingly well. The Who has had a few different drummers. Their present drummer is Zach Starkey, Ringo Starr's son. The filming of Tommy was quite eventful. Aunt Margaret had to have stitches in her hand after cutting it on a broken TV. Do you remember the scene where a building in Tommy's holiday camp burned down? Well, it was an accidental fire, but on a pier in South Sea, not the building, and the fire crews were real. Strawberry Alarm Clock. There are a lot of strange band names out there, and this is certainly one of them. The band members were fans of the Beatles and their song Strawberry Fields Forever, and they wanted to use Strawberry in their own name. Then, someone noticed an old alarm clock in the room, and Strawberry Alarm Clock was christened. In 2012, the reunited band produced their first studio album since 1969, called Wake Up Where You Are. They're often referred to as a one-hit wonder because Incense and Peppermints is the only song many are familiar with. Did you know that the lead vocals in that song were not sung by a band member? A 16-year-old friend of the band, Greg Mumford, happened to be in the studio when they were recording the song, and he sang for the demo recording. The plan was to add the other member's voice later, but the producers preferred Mumford's rendition. Ever the psychedelic band, they were fans of Kraftons and Magic Carpets. They used to sit on the carpets and allow their roadies to carry them onto the stage. Strawberry Alarm Clock also made 2 movies, in which they appear as themselves, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and Psych Out. The latter film was mostly written by Jack Nicholson, and he played the leading role. The band played Incense and Peppermints in both films, and that song appears on the soundtracks of various other movies, including Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. The Kinks. Originally called the Ravens and the Boll Weevils, the Kinks were founded by brothers Ray and Dave Davis. The 2 boys, who had 6 older sisters, attended the same London school as Rod Stewart. When they decided to form a band, Stewart was briefly the lead singer. He left the band in 1962 to form his own, the Moonrakers, and the 2 bands were rivals. Unfortunately, the band members did not get along well, as seen in a fight that broke out between Dave Davis and drummer Mick Avery on stage during a concert. Avery walloped Davis over the head with his hi-hat stand, and Davis needed 16 stitches. To avoid being arrested, the band had to pretend the fight was part of an experimental onstage act. Such antics may have been the reason they were banned from touring in the U.S. at first. They still achieved fame, though, with You Really Got Me. Fans loved the guitar riff. To get that loud, distorted sound, Dave Davis made a slice in his amp speaker. Like many artists in the 60s, Ray Davis was fascinated by Indian music and culture and incorporated some Eastern elements in his music. His most notable result was See My Friends. The inspiration for the song came from Davis's visit to Bombay, where he heard local fishermen chanting in the morning. Pink Floyd. Three of the founding members of Pink Floyd met in university, where they were all studying architecture. The band's name changed several times. Sigma Six, the Megadeths, the Abdabs, Leonard Rogers, and the T-Set. Finally, guitarist Syd Barrett named the band after two blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. One of the most successful bands in history, their 1973 album, The Dark Side of the Moon, remained on the Billboard Top 200 for nearly 16 years. Did you hear the rumor that it synchronizes exactly with The Wizard of Oz? Well, it doesn't, but drummer Nick Mason deadpanned that they had intended it to match the sound of music instead. Pink Floyd was known for their multimedia performances. They used a film projector starting in 1966. Later, they graduated to inflatable flying pigs, pyrotechnics, and live surround sound, which they were the first to use. Sometimes these innovations didn't go over so well. They were banned from several venues because of the pyrotechnics, and the pig once floated away and got into Heathrow's flight path. Speaking of animals, have you seen the album cover for their album Animals? It features a flying pig behind the Battersea Power Station. The name, the cover, and much of the lyrical content on the album were inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm. Another album cover for Which You Were Here shows a businessman who is on fire. The fire was real, and the businessman was a stuntman. Despite the safety precautions, he ended up with a singed mustache. The list of Pink Floyd accomplishments is almost endless. One claim to fame is that they were the first rock band to be played in space. Russian cosmonauts took Delicate Sound of Thunder with them to the Mir space station in 1989. And speaking of space, Douglas Adams, author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, named their album The Division Bell. The Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead and the Velvet Underground have something in common. They were both once known as the Warlocks. Jerry Garcia, who studied at the Art Institute in San Francisco, came up with the name The Grateful Dead while reading a folklore dictionary. Before Garcia became a musician, he picked beans and apricots in the field. Jerry Garcia was known for his guitar playing, but did you know that his first instrument was a banjo? And Phil Lesh only started playing bass when he joined the band. He was a classically trained trumpeter. The Grateful Dead saw themselves as an egalitarian band and composed several songs together. The group compositions were credited to McGanahan Scagelli Fetty. The Grateful Dead inspired fans beyond the music, even in the business world. At least two business books have been inspired by the band. Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead, What Every Business Can Learn from the Most Iconic Band in History, and Everything I Know About Business I Learned from the Grateful Dead, The 10 Most Innovative Lessons from a Long, Strange Trip. Have you seen the 80s remake of The Twilight Zone? The Grateful Dead wrote the music for the opening and closing credits. You, or your parents, may have had a Jerry Garcia tie or a Grateful Dead shirt. However, some say the dancing bears are supposed to look like they're marching. Jefferson Airplane. The face of psychedelic hedonism was made famous by the contralto vibrato vocals of Grace Slick, who was a former model. She was the one who wrote their most famous songs, Somebody to Love and White Rabbit. Slick was born in the year of the rabbit, and when she was a child lived next door to a man who had 40 white rabbits, most likely for fur coats. She now keeps rabbits as pets and feeds raccoons. White Rabbit was, however, mostly inspired by Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which Grace Slick's parents used to read to her. She says that the rabbit represents curiosity and Alice follows him. Slick also wrote the song to point out the hypocrisy of adults that promote such literature and wonder why their kids grow up to take drugs. Before writing the song, Slick listened to Sketches of Spain by Miles Davis for a full day. White Rabbit and Somebody to Love appears on Surrealistic Pillow. Jerry Garcia was the one to suggest the name, saying the music on it was as surrealistic as a pillow is soft. He's credited on the album as the band's spiritual advisor. After leaving the band, Slick became the first known rock star to attend Alcoholics Anonymous, and she exhibits her own paintings. Led Zeppelin. The members of Led Zeppelin were aficionados of Tolkien, Celtic mythology, and folklore. They are credited as the first real metal band. Despite the band's technological abilities in the recording studio, you can hear phones ringing and John Bonham's squeaky drum pedals in the background of some of their songs, such as The Ocean, The Rain Song, and Dancing Days. Not everyone was a Led Zeppelin fan. Countess Frau Eva von Zeppelin called the band Shrieking Monkeys and threatened to sue them for using her family's name. To avoid this, they called themselves the Knobs when touring Copenhagen. The band didn't limit their aspirations to Middle-earth and ancient Britain. However, Kashmir is not about the region of Kashmir. The song was inspired by Robert Plant's time in Morocco. There's also Going to California. This one was about Joni Mitchell, who Robert Plant was infatuated with. Blue Oyster Cult. The band, once known as Soft White Underbelly, has been called the American Black Sabbath and the world's brainiest heavy metal band. Lead singer, though they always took turns singing lead, Eric Bloom once said they were among the shortest bands in rock. Lead guitarist Buck Dharma was only 5'2", and Bloom was 5'7". However, there were shorter bands, such as the Small Faces. Speaking of Buck Dharma, he was entirely self-taught on guitar. Blue Oyster Cult is known for its Kabbalistic lyrics, but they're mostly influenced by the band's interest in sci-fi and fantasy. Aside from Patti Smith, the group had a journalist and a fantasy author contribute to their lyrics. They also had authors as fans, such as Stephen King and J.K. Rowling. Under her pseudonym, Robert Galbraith, Rowling incorporated several Blue Oyster Cult songs into her latest detective novel, Career of Evil. The band members themselves were bookworms, as noted by a surprised reporter who went to their dressing room for an interview and found them all sitting around reading instead of partying. Eric Bloom was the band's acoustic engineer before he was their lead singer. He likes martial arts and Star Trek. The term stun guitar comes from Star Trek, and on at least one occasion brought his lunch to the studio in a Korg lunchbox. To get Eric Bloom on stage biker look, manager Sandy Pearlman took him to a gay store to buy black leather. Bloom said the outfit made him feel like Batman. They were also one of the first bands to use lasers in their concerts. Scientists even came to their concerts to take notes. The band eventually stopped using the lasers because they were expensive. Oh, and what happened to the band's first lead singer? Jeff Cagle left the band early on and went to India and became Krishna Das. He sings a spiritual music called Kirtan and was called the Parvati of Kirtan by Yoga Journal. Rush. Rush is the definitive progressive rock band with all three band members virtuosos on their instrument. Known for his ability to hit high notes, bassist and lead singer Geddy Lee has a 3-octave range. When he's not playing music, Lee likes to watch and read about baseball. He participates in the games too. He inaugurated the Toronto Blue Jays' 2013 season by throwing the first pitch, and he sang the Canadian national anthem for the 1993 Major League Baseball All-Star Game. Drummer Neil Peart wrote most of the band's lyrics, drawing on literature, mythology, philosophy, and sci-fi, among other topics, and lyrics aren't all he writes. He's written several non-fiction books, most of which are about his extensive travels. He also has a racing team called Bangers and Mash. Known for his intricate drum solos, Peart once called playing drums with Rush running a marathon while solving equations. Early in his career, he started playing drums with the base of his sticks instead of the tips. Initially, this was to save money, as the tips would break off, and he'd have to replace the sticks, but then he got used to the bigger sound. Unlike most other rock bands, Rush doesn't use amplifier stacks, so they fill the space with house appliances such as a fully stocked fridge, working dryers full of custom-made Rush t-shirts given to the audience after the concert, and rotisserie ovens that were tended by a chef. And all of these appliances were mic'd. Queen. Legendary singer Freddie Mercury's voice was so unusual that it's been the subject of scientific studies, with the conclusion that his vocal cords moved abnormally fast, and he used a technique called subharmonics, used by Tuvan throat singers. Pretty impressive, especially since he did it all with no formal voice training. Freddie Mercury's stage antics included performing on Darth Vader's shoulder and Superman's back. Like John Lennon, he was a cat person, with over 10 cats at one time. He often phoned them when he was traveling. Mercury nearly collaborated with Michael Jackson on an album, but objected to the presence of Jackson's llama in the studio. He was friends with Princess Diana. One night she asked Mercury to take her to a gay bar, and he dressed her as a very handsome man. Her presence was undetected as everyone was focused on Freddie. Though Mercury is the most famous member of Queen, guitarist Brian May should not be overlooked. When he was a teenager, he made a guitar from scratch from his home's mantelpiece, and this is the guitar he used in concert for 30 years. He has a PhD in astrophysics and applied his knowledge in physics in the studio to achieve different sounds when recording. He and astronaut Rusty Schweickart are co-founders of the educational campaign Asteroid Day. Speaking of space, Mercury incorporated all 4 band members' zodiac signs into Queen's logo, KISS. The band, once known as Wicked Lester, is not only one of the most recognized rock bands in the world, they also have a line of KISS caskets. Dimebag Darrell, guitarist of Pantera, was buried in one. The band has also planned to produce a line of jeans, but it didn't work out. Most of the band members perform under names they weren't born with. Vocalist and bassist Gene Simmons' real name is Chaim Witz, and he once wanted to become a rabbi. Guitarist Paul Stanley, in contrast, majored in art. A lot of art goes into the musician's on-stage look with the wild outfits and full makeup, and it hasn't always gone on smoothly. Ace Frehley developed an allergy to the silver makeup that was part of his look and had to switch to blue eyeshadow. He also once spray-painted his hair silver thinking it would wash out. It didn't. Despite the band's wild image and notorious backstage shenanigans, they did not curse on stage in the years they performed in makeup, since their look at that time attracted younger fans. Speaking of young people, in God of Thunder you can hear children's voices in the background. They are the producer's sons. Metallica. James Hetfield doesn't understand Metallica co-founder Lars Ulrich's love of pancakes. The drummer says he eats up to 20 pancakes per day, made of oats, yogurt, egg whites, and stevia, insisting it's one key to his good health. One of Hetfield's hobbies is beekeeping. Guitarist Kirk Hammett replaced Dave Mustaine, but he almost did an audition because he thought the invitation was a prank. While thrash metal is not known for connections to literature, Metallica is not just any band. Their most obvious literary song is For Whom the Bell Tolls, but the band members, particularly late bassist Cliff Burton, were also fans of classic horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. The Thing That Should Not Be and The Call of Cthulhu were inspired by Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. And if you're thinking, they misspelled Cthulhu, well, of course they did. Writing the old one's name correctly can summon him. You might want to look behind you. Does the opening riff to Don't Tread on Me sound familiar? It's taken from America and West Side Story. If you think you've heard Metallica band members' voices in cartoons, you may be right. Ulrich and Hetfield voiced 2 dragons on the Disney series Dave the Barbarian, and Hetfield sang Hell Isn't Good in South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. U2. All 4 band members met in high school. Paul David Hewson, aka Bono, also met his future wife at the same school. His nickname comes from Bono Vox, which was a local hearing aid company and also means good voice in Latin. David Howe Evans got the nickname The Edge for his angular features. The band was originally called Feedback, possibly because they took a while to produce good sound. U2 has produced 14 studio albums to date, the first being Boy. The cover features the young nephew of a friend, and the boy also appeared on the cover of War 3 years later. From Joshua Tree, One Tree Hill is about a roadie and friend of the band who died in a motorcycle accident in 1986. The vocals you hear in the song are Bono's first take. He couldn't bring himself to sing it more than once. The bands that have opened for U2 include the Dalton Brothers, a country group. In an Indianapolis show, they sang a Hank Williams song and an original ballad. The fan nearest the stage eventually realized that the country band was U2 in disguise. That's the end of Chapter 3. Let me know what you guys thought of Chapter 3 in the comments. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Until then, rock on.